My name is Ayla. And the night they destroyed my family, the world didn't end with a scream. It ended with a knock. 2:17 a.m. 3 slow knocks on our gate. Not loud. Not angry. Just, final. My mother was folding clothes. My brother was asleep. I was studying on the floor with a broken lamp flickering above me. When the knock came, every part of me went cold at once. My mother whispered, "Don't open it." But my brother already stood up. They were men in clean shirts. No uniforms. No badges. Just eyes that didn't care. "Your father is needed for questioning," one said. My father stepped forward before anyone else could speak. He looked at me. Not scared. Not angry. Just apologetic. Like he already knew he wasn't coming back. I ran to him. "Baba, don't go." He touched my forehead. "Ayla, take care of your mother." That was the last thing he ever said to me. They took him without shouting. Without struggle. Without explanation. And the gate closed. 3 days later, the city printed his face under a lie. Local man linked to property fraud. Fraud. My father who counted every rupee. Who refused bribes. Who taught me that honor is worth more than money. They buried him with ink before he was buried with soil. At school, people stared. At the market, people whispered. At home, my mother stopped speaking. Then came the paint. One morning, our wall was covered in words. Criminal. Thief. Leave this area. My mother tried to wash it off. The water turned red from her hands before the paint faded. That's when I felt it. Not sadness. Not fear. Rage. A quiet, burning rage that didn't scream, it waited. And the man behind it all? His name was Seima Qureshi. Everyone loved him. TV interviews. Charity dinners. Big smiles. And he wanted our land. Our house sat right in the center of his future luxury project. My father said no. So Seima said, "Destroy him." Seima came to our house 1 week after my father was taken. He didn't knock. He walked in like the place already belonged to him. "Your father should have listened," he said calmly. My mother didn't answer. He looked at me. "You're Ayla, right?" I nodded. He smiled. "You look smart. Smart girls know when to walk away." Then he looked around our home like a buyer checking walls. "This house will be mine." And he left. That night, my mother cried in silence. I didn't cry. I wrote names, dates, places, lies. Because I knew something Seima didn't. You can erase a man from the city, but not from his daughter's memory. And I was going to make him regret ever learning my name. They thought fear would make me quiet. They were wrong. After Seima Qureshi walked out of our house that day, something changed in me. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It was slow, like a switch being flipped deep inside my chest. The kind that doesn't turn back. That night, my mother finally spoke. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall where the paint stains still lived like ghosts. "Ayla," she whispered, "we can't fight people like him." Her voice wasn't weak. It was tired. I looked at her and felt something heavier than anger. Responsibility. "Then we won't fight," I said softly. "We'll watch." She didn't understand. Not yet. The next week, men started coming around our street. Measuring tape. Clipboards. Polite smiles. They acted like our house was already gone. Neighbors avoided us. Some out of fear. Some out of shame. One woman I'd grown up calling Auntie crossed the street when she saw me. Another whispered, "Better stay quiet, girl. Big people don't lose." That sentence stayed in my head. Big people don't lose. So I started thinking small. I got a job at a local cafe. Not because we needed money, we did, but because I needed eyes. And ears. That cafe sat 2 streets away from Seima's main office. Rich men like coffee. And rich men talk. I learned fast who came in every morning at 9:30. Who complained. Who bragged. Who slipped when they thought no one important was listening. I smiled. I poured coffee. I listened. One man said, "Seima played that family perfectly." Another laughed. "They'll be gone by next month." My hands shook when I carried the cups. Not from fear. From control. At night, I wrote everything down. Notebooks filled my backpack. Dates. Times. Names. And then, something happened. One evening, I stayed late to clean. The cafe was empty except for one table. Seima Qureshi sat there. Alone. His phone was on the table. His face was tired. Real tired. Not the billboard smile. Not the TV charm. Just a man. I poured his coffee with steady hands. He looked up. "Oh," he said. "You're the girl." My heart skipped, but my face didn't. "Yes, sir." He studied me. "You work hard," he said. "Shame about your family situation." I didn't answer. He leaned back. "Life teaches lessons. Your father didn't learn his." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. "Would you like sugar?" He laughed. That was the moment I understood something dangerous. He didn't see me as a threat. He saw me as invisible. And invisible people can go anywhere. A week later, one of his assistants started coming to the cafe. A man named Bilal. Loud. Talkative. Always complaining about work. One night he said, "You wouldn't believe the things Seima does to people." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Bilal leaned closer. "Like making problems disappear." That sentence wrapped itself around my bones. The next month, I started recording. Not with big equipment. Not with cameras. Just my phone. Hidden. Quiet. Coffee cups. Conversations. Whispers. People forget themselves when they feel powerful. And powerful people always talk too much. One night, Bilal said something that made my breath stop. They blamed the father. But it was all fake. The papers. The case. All planned. I almost dropped the tray. I kept smiling. I kept listening. Because now I wasn't just angry. Now, I had direction. And Seima Qureshi had no idea that the girl he dismissed as nothing was building a storm in silence. By the third month, my notebooks were no longer empty. They were heavy. Not with paper, but with truth. Every page felt like a heartbeat. Every line felt like a step closer to something I didn't fully understand yet, but trusted. Bilal started talking more. Not because I pushed him. Because power makes people careless. One night, he stayed after closing. The lights were low. The street outside was quiet. He leaned on the counter and sighed. "You ever feel bad for people you destroy?" I froze inside. But my face stayed calm. "Do you?" I asked. He laughed. "Not me. Seima does. But he hides it well." Then he said it. The sentence that changed everything. The father never touched any fraud. Seima's legal team built that case in 3 days. 3 days. My father's life, erased in 3 days. I went home that night and couldn't breathe. Not crying. Not shaking. Just sitting on the floor, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. My mother asked, "What's wrong?" I looked at her. And for the first time since Baba was taken, I told her the truth. Not everything. Just enough. She covered her mouth and cried silently. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said. I nodded. But inside, I wasn't planning to be careful. I was planning to be exact. The next phase wasn't about listening anymore. It was about collecting. I changed jobs. Not far. Closer. Seima Qureshi's office building had a media department. Small. Underpaid. Always hiring. I applied. And got in. Just like that. My first day, I walked past his glass office. He didn't recognize me. That hurt. And helped. I worked in editing. Videos. Interviews. Promotional content. And I learned something terrifying. Seima didn't just destroy people. He recorded everything. Meetings. Calls. Deals. Powerful men don't trust memory. They trust files. One evening, I was alone in the office. Everyone else had left. The server room door was unlocked. I stood there for a long time. Heart beating. Not from fear. From destiny. I went in. Just a little. Just to look. Folders everywhere. Years of recordings. And then, I saw a folder. Project Clear Path. The same name Bilal had once whispered. I opened it. And my whole body went cold. There were videos. Audio. Documents. Proof. Of everything. Saima Qureshi wasn't just corrupt. He was surgical. He chose people. Broke them. Then took what he wanted. I copied one file. Then another. Then another. Every night after that, I took pieces. Slow. Invisible. Until one evening, I heard his voice in my headphones. I want the father gone. Not arrested. Gone. My hands stopped working. My eyes filled. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Because now, I wasn't just chasing justice. I was holding it. And Saima Qureshi had no idea that the girl who served him coffee was about to serve him something far worse. The more I took, the more I realized something terrifying. Saima Qureshi didn't just control land. He controlled stories. He decided who looked innocent, who looked guilty, who disappeared quietly, and who got headlines. And now I had his private archive. At home, I hid everything inside an old sewing machine case. My mother thought it was broken. She never touched it. That's where the truth lived. Every night, I listened. His voice. Cold. Calm. Precise. Pressure the family. Scare them. Make the neighbors turn. They'll leave on their own. That last sentence felt like he was standing in our living room again. One night, I found something worse. A recorded meeting. Saima's voice again. They won't find anything on the father. So we make something. Another man asked, what about the girl? Saima paused. Girls break easy. I took off my headphones and threw them across the room. Not from fear. From insult. I didn't sleep that night. I walked. I thought. I planned. Because collecting truth is one thing. Releasing it without dying socially is another. I couldn't go to police. Saima owned half of them. I couldn't go to court. He paid the other half. So I went where power fears something else. The internet. Not as Ayla. Not as a victim. As a ghost. I created a new account. No name. No face. Just a channel. And I started editing. Not fast. Not careless. Perfect. I cut the clips into a story. Not rage. Not shouting. Just truth. His voice. His words. His plans. I added subtitles. So no one could ignore them. The title? The Men Who Erase Families for Property. Before I posted it, I sat in the dark. My finger hovered over the button. Once I press this, there is no going back. I thought about my father's last words. Ayla, take care of your mother. Then I pressed upload. The first hour, 47 views. Second hour, 300. Third hour, 1,200. Then, something shifted. People started sharing, commenting, asking questions. Is this real? Who is this man? This sounds like Qureshi Group. By morning, the video had 80,000 views. By noon, 400,000. By night, it was everywhere. And Saima Qureshi still didn't know. Yet. But I did. Because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Unknown numbers. Missed calls. Messages. Delete the video. You don't know what you're doing. Take it down now. I didn't reply. I just made another video. This one was shorter, stronger, and ended with his own words. I want the father gone. I posted it. And went to sleep. For the first time in months. I slept without fear. I woke up to sirens. Not outside my house. Inside my phone. Notifications. Messages. Mentions. Tags. My anonymous channel had crossed 1 million views overnight. 1 million people had heard Saima Qureshi's real voice. Not the TV voice. Not the charity voice. The truth voice. My hands were steady when I picked up the phone. That's how I knew I was no longer afraid. News pages had posted screenshots. Influencers were reacting. Lawyers were asking questions. And Saima? Seima was silent. For 12 hours. Then, he moved. The cafe where I used to work? Closed. Bilal? Gone. My office building? Security doubled. Seima Qureshi had finally realized. The ghost had a name. And it was coming for him. That afternoon, my mother came into my room holding her phone. Her face was pale. Ayla, they're talking about your father. I opened her screen. A news anchor said, new evidence suggests that the late Mr. Rahman was falsely accused in a property fraud case connected to Qureshi Group. Late. They still called him late. But for the first time, they also called him innocent. My chest tightened. Not from pain. From something close to relief. That evening, my anonymous inbox filled with messages. Journalists. Activists. Law firms. They all wanted the files. The truth. And I gave it to them. Not everything. Not yet. Because I wasn't just exposing Seima. I was building his ending. Seima tried to fight back. He posted a video. Suit. Lights. Sad music. He said, this is a conspiracy. A fake voice. A manipulated campaign. I watched it with no expression. Then I opened his own file. The one where he said, make the neighbors turn. And I released it. The next morning, his video was gone. So was his confidence. Then came the knock. Not on our gate. On my door. A journalist stood there. Are you Ayla Rahman? I looked at her. And nodded. That was the moment I stopped being a ghost. And started becoming a storm. The journalist's name was Nadia. She didn't come with a camera crew. No flashing lights. No dramatic entrance. Just a notebook. A recorder. And eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. We sat in our small living room. The same room Seima Qureshi once walked into like a king. Nadia looked around. The walls still smell like paint, she said softly. My mother stood in the kitchen, listening but pretending not to. I nodded. They tried to erase us before the world could see us. Nadia pressed record. Tell me about your father. And I did. Not as a victim. Not as a crying daughter. But as a witness. I told her about his honesty. About the land. About Seima. About the files. I didn't show her everything. Just enough. Her hand stopped writing halfway through. Do you understand what this means, Ayla? Yes, I said. It means he can't hide anymore. The article went live the next morning. Not on some small blog. On the front page of the biggest digital newspaper in the country. Daughter exposes property tycoon. You took my father. That headline didn't scream. It cut. Seima Qureshi's name was everywhere now. Not in praise. In doubt. His old interviews were replayed with new captions. His charity speeches were slowed down and analyzed. Every word he ever said was now under a microscope. And people saw what I always saw. A man who smiled with his mouth, but not with his eyes. Seima tried to meet me. Not publicly. Privately. One evening, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. We need to talk. This can be fixed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied. No. 5 minutes later. You don't understand what you're doing. I typed back. I understand exactly. He called. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't interested in fixing things. I was interested in finishing them. That night, I uploaded the last file. The one where he said it clearly. Not metaphorically. Not indirectly. Directly. I want the father gone. Not arrested. Gone. No music. No editing. Just his voice. Raw. The internet exploded. This time, even his allies went quiet. By morning, police had no choice. They announced an investigation. For the first time in my life, I saw Seima Qureshi without control. Without confidence. Without power. And I felt something new. Not victory. Not revenge. But something deeper. Balance. The investigation didn't start with handcuffs. It started with silence. Seima Qureshi disappeared from TV. From charity events. From the front pages where he used to live. His office lights stayed off at night. That alone told me everything. Power doesn't vanish quietly unless it's bleeding somewhere. 2 days after the last audio went viral, I was called to the station. Not as a suspect. As a source. I walked into the building with my back straight and my hands empty. No files. No devices. Just my name. Ayla. They put me in a small room with a mirror on one wall and a man with tired eyes across from me. "Miss Rahman," he said, "we've reviewed your material." I waited. He leaned forward. "You didn't just expose corruption. You exposed a pattern." That word hit me harder than any accusation. Pattern. Sama didn't hurt just my family. He hurt many. I slid one last notebook across the table. "This is everyone I heard him talk about," I said. "Families. Land. Threats." The officer flipped through it slowly, and for the first time since my father was taken, someone in authority looked at me with respect. Not pity. Respect. That night, I went home and sat on the roof. The city below me buzzed like nothing had happened. People still ate dinner. Still laughed. Still lived. But somewhere inside that noise, a giant was cracking. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice. Low. Careful. "Ayla Rahman," he said. "This is Sama Qureshi." I didn't speak. "I just want to talk," he said. "You and we can end this." I looked at the sky. At the same stars my father used to point at when the lights went out. "And what?" I asked. "This chaos," he said. I smiled. "No," I replied. "This is the truth. Chaos was before." He paused. "You think you've won?" "I think," I said calmly, "you finally met someone you couldn't buy." He hung up. 3 days later, the news broke. Property tycoon questioned in multiple fraud and intimidation cases. They showed his building, his cars, his empty chair, but not his face. Because now, he had none to show. And for the first time since that night at 2:17 a.m., I felt something lift off my chest. Not all the way, but enough to breathe. The city didn't explode in celebration. It whispered. People don't cheer when a powerful man falls. They watch. Carefully. Waiting to see if he gets back up. Sama Qureshi didn't. Not this time. His name started vanishing from buildings. From websites. From sponsorship banners. One by one. Like lights shutting off in a hallway. I walked past one of his old billboards on my way home from the market. Someone had spray painted over his smiling face. Liar. I stopped and stared at it for a long time. Not with satisfaction. With disbelief. Because just months ago, nobody would have dared touch that poster. Now, strangers were finishing my sentence for me. At home, my mother was cooking again. Not silently. Not mechanically. But humming. It was the first time I'd heard her do that since Baba was taken. She looked up when I walked in. "They called him innocent on the news," she said softly. I froze. "They said your father's name," she continued. Out loud. Clearly. My hands started to shake. Not from anger. From release. Because when the world says someone's name again, they're no longer gone. That night, I opened my anonymous channel one last time. Not to expose. Not to attack. But to speak. I looked straight into the camera. "My name is Ayla Rahman," I said. I was silent for a long time. Not because I was weak, but because I was listening. I told them about my father. About our house. About power. And then I said the sentence that lived inside me for years. You can erase a man from the city, but you can't erase him from his daughter's heart. The video didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It went real. People shared it quietly. Personally. Messages came from other daughters. Other sons. Other families. "Thank you. You gave us courage. We thought we were alone." And that's when I understood something bigger than revenge. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was everyone's who'd ever been told to stay quiet. But Sama Qureshi still wasn't finished. Not completely. Because powerful men don't fall once. They fall, piece by piece. Weeks passed. Seima Qureshi tried to reclaim control. Billboards reappeared. Articles popped up praising his philanthropy. Influencers attempted to spin his image. But the foundation I had built was stronger. Every step he tried to take, I was already ahead. I monitored. I recorded. I waited. Then one afternoon, the breakthrough came. Bilal, the same assistant who had spilled everything at the cafe. He walked into the office with a box of documents. Nervous. Trembling. I can't take it anymore, he whispered. They're going to find out everything. His finished. I had been tracking Bilal's movements for weeks. Every coffee run, every side conversation, every slip. And now, he came to me willingly. I took the files from him. Old contracts, hidden payments, threatening letters. It was more than enough. I brought them to Nadia. She widened her eyes. This is everything we need to bring him down for good. Finally, the walls weren't just whispering truth, they were screaming it. The next week, Seima Qureshi's empire started to collapse. Banks froze accounts. Investors pulled out. Employees quit. And the media? They dissected every word I had collected. He reached out to me again. This time, a personal call. Ayla, stop this. We can negotiate. I smiled. No, I said calmly. You destroyed my family. You took my father. You thought I'd never fight back. But I have something stronger than your power. Silence on the other end. He understood. Finally. Because I had become the storm he never saw coming. And for the first time since that fateful knock, I felt vindicated. Not just for me. For my father. For my family. For everyone like us who had been silenced. The city didn't know my face yet. But they knew my name, Ayla Rahman. And Seima Qureshi? He would remember it for the rest of his life. By the 10th week, the pressure was unbearable for Seima. The media didn't give him a chance to speak freely. Every public statement he made was twisted by the truth I had revealed. Every ally he tried to call for help hesitated. And I watched it all. Not with glee. Not with hatred. But with focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. I remember the night clearly. My mother and I sat together, our hands wrapped around steaming cups of tea. Do you think it's enough? She asked quietly. I looked at her. You can't measure justice, Ma, I said softly. But we can make sure it's felt. The next day, Seima's phone rang non-stop. Calls from lawyers, news outlets, regulators. He paced in his office like a caged animal. And then came the final blow. One of the journalists I trusted, Nadia, published the last piece. A detailed report connecting him to the plan that destroyed my father and several other families. Every contract, every recorded conversation, every threat laid bare. The headline screamed, "Property tycoon exposed. The truth no one could hide." I sat in my room and let it sink in. For years, I had planned, watched, waited, recorded, edited, and finally, it had all led here. The world saw him as he truly was. And I was no longer just a girl who had lost her father. I was the daughter who had made him pay. Not with violence. Not with threats. But with truth. And truth is unstoppable. That night, I went to sleep with a strange calm. The storm I had built wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had been silenced. And somewhere deep inside, I felt my father's presence. Proud. Finally, proud. The following weeks were surreal. Seima Qureshi had vanished from public life entirely. His offices were empty, his empire crumbling piece by piece. No amount of charm or money could undo the avalanche of truth I had released. But I didn't stop there. I had to make sure he couldn't rise again. I started reaching out to the other families he had targeted over the years. Quietly, carefully, sharing the recordings, documents, and evidence I had compiled. Some were hesitant at first. Afraid. Ashamed. But once they saw the files, their fear turned into action. Together, we became a network. A quiet army of people who had been wronged. Emails sent to regulatory authorities. Evidence provided to investigative journalists. Every hidden fraud, every intimidation, every destroyed life, laid bare. One by one, Sema's allies abandoned him. His legal team, his business partners, even his closest advisors, all pulled away. And the final humiliation came on a Friday morning. I had posted one last video. Not flashy, not loud, just truth. The screen showed a simple title: The Fall of Sema Qureshi, Voices of the Silenced. The video compiled everything: his own words, the victims' testimonies, the proof of his manipulations. Within hours, it went viral again. News channels picked it up. Social media exploded. Hashtags trending nationwide. And Sema Qureshi? No smiling billboard. No charitable dinners. No power. Just the realization that his empire had been dismantled by a single girl he underestimated. Ayla Rahman. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel revenge. I felt closure. I had given my father back his honor. I had given my family back their dignity. And I had given the world a story of justice that couldn't be silenced. I stood by the window that evening, looking at the city lights. And I whispered softly, justice isn't about fighting with fists. It's about fighting with truth. The storm had passed, but the echoes would last forever. Months later, Sema Qureshi attempted to reappear. A small statement, a half-hearted apology, a desperate attempt to spin his image. It was laughable. Not to me, not to the families, not to the journalists who had carefully documented every misdeed. Every word he spoke was dissected. Every lie he tried to weave was unraveled by the evidence I had released. And every attempt he made to reclaim his empire failed. Because power doesn't forgive silence. It doesn't forgive the truth. I remember the day clearly. My mother sat across from me, holding tea in her hands. Her eyes were tired but soft. You did it, Ayla, she said quietly. You gave your father justice. You gave us peace. I didn't smile. Not in triumph. Not yet. I simply nodded. Because this wasn't about me. It was about righting a wrong so deep that it had taken years to expose. Even my anonymous channel had become a symbol. People spoke of it quietly at first, then louder. The girl who exposed the richest, most untouchable man in the city. And I knew something vital. Revenge had been satisfying. Justice had been fulfilling. But the real power lay in truth being heard. I walked to my father's room, now empty but filled with memories. His desk, his chair, the old clock ticking silently. I whispered, Baba, they know now. They finally know. And I kept my promise. Outside, the city moved on. People laughed. People cried. People lived. And Sema Qureshi? He had nothing left to steal. Nothing left to lie about. And in that silence, I finally allowed myself to breathe. Ayla Rahman had won. Not through violence. Not through fear. But through patience, cunning, and relentless truth. And the world had watched every step of it unfold. After months of watching the empire crumble, Sema Qureshi finally reached the end of his rope. I heard through multiple sources, lawyers, journalists, even former allies, that he was isolated, paranoid, and desperate. His power, once untouchable, now belonged to the history books. But I didn't celebrate publicly. That wasn't the point. Instead, I focused on the quiet victories, the families who had been ignored, the fathers and mothers erased like my own, the children who had been silenced. One by one, their stories began to surface, validated by the evidence I had collected. And in doing so, I realized something profound. Revenge was personal, yes. But justice is universal. I organized a meeting with several of the families. Together, we documented the timeline of events, created a public archive, and worked with journalists to ensure Sema could never manipulate the truth again. At home, my mother and I finally repaired the walls. Not just the paint, but the silence, the grief, the fear. It was hard work. Quiet work. But necessary. One evening, as we sat together in our living room, my mother looked at me and smiled. You did more than avenge your father, she said softly. You restored what was taken from all of us. I nodded. feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest. Outside, the city hummed with life. The noise of construction, the honk of cars, the chatter of neighbors, all continued. And in the midst of it, I knew, Seima Qureshi was gone from the lives of people he tried to destroy. And the legacy he left behind was one of shame, exposure, and defeat. I looked out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled, indifferent, but somehow reassuring. I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "Power is temporary. Truth is eternal." And in that moment, I felt my father's presence again. Watching. Proud. Ayla Rahman had fulfilled her promise. Not with violence. Not with threats. But with patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. And finally, I let myself smile. Because justice, real justice, had been served. The climax came quietly, almost poetically. Seima Qureshi had one last move. A media interview. A desperate attempt to clear his name. I watched it live. He spoke with rehearsed charm, but this time, the cracks were obvious. The arrogance that once fooled everyone was gone. His hands shook slightly. His eyes darted. Every word felt defensive, exposed. Then came the moment that sealed everything. A journalist confronted him on air with irrefutable evidence. Contracts, recordings, testimonies, all from my files. Seima tried to deny it, but the world had already heard him say it himself. "I want the father gone." The camera lingered on him. Sweat on his brow. A forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. And I felt it. The satisfaction that isn't revenge, but justice manifest. Across the city, news spread like wildfire. Seima's social media accounts flooded with hashtags. #truthexposed, #justice4Rahman. Investors pulled back their support. Partners severed ties. For the first time, he had no choice. The empire he built with manipulation, fear, and lies, crumbled in real time. And I, Ayla Rahman, watched it all unfold. I walked home that evening under the city lights, the same lights my father used to point out to me when I was little. The silence of justice was louder than any scream. I entered our home, where my mother waited. She embraced me tightly. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Yes, Ma," I said, letting the weight of months, years, finally lift from my shoulders. Later, I uploaded one final video, not as a ghost, not as a weapon, but as a message. Truth cannot be bought. Lies cannot last. And justice, though delayed, always arrives. It wasn't viral. It didn't need to be. It was real. The world knew the truth about Seima Qureshi. My father's name was cleared. Families he tried to destroy were vindicated. And me? I was free. Not because I had revenge. Not because I had power. But because I had ensured that the truth lived, and no one, not even Seima Qureshi, could ever take it away. The storm had ended. The city went on. And in the quiet aftermath, I finally whispered aloud, "Justice is eternal." Ayla Rahman had won. And that, finally, was enough.